Late one night, under the pale light of street lamps, Marcus, a 12-year-old boy, grips the steering wheel of an old car with shaky hands. The weight of the baby in his arms presses against his chest, and the cries echo through the empty streets, growing louder with every passing moment. He's driving faster than he should, but there's no time to waste. The baby's small body is limp in his arms, its fragile cries mixing with the urgency of the situation. Marcus isn't the baby's father, but in this moment, he's the only one who can help. His mother, his neighbor, had collapsed unexpectedly, and with no one else around to take charge, Marcus found himself thrust into a role he wasn't prepared for. His mind races as he tries to focus on the road. The baby's condition is worsening, and he can't shake the feeling that he's running out of time. He doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't know how to help, but he knows one thing. He has to get to the hospital, fast. But Marcus is just a boy. He shouldn't be behind the wheel, and he shouldn't have to bear the weight of someone else's life on his young shoulders. Every second feels like a lifetime, the car's engine humming as he presses the pedal harder, trying to outrun the panic creeping into his chest. His mind flickers to his own family, to the struggles they've faced, and to the responsibility that's suddenly been thrust upon him. The baby's cries grow louder, more desperate, and Marcus knows he can't stop, not now. Just as the faint glow of the hospital sign starts to appear in the distance, Marcus notices flashing lights in his rearview mirror. His stomach sinks. A siren wails. His heart races faster than the car can go. He has no choice but to pull over. He's terrified of everything, but most of all, of what will happen next. He's a 12-year-old boy, alone with a baby, and a cop is pulling him over in the middle of the night. The odds are against him. The officer steps out of his patrol car, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights. His steps are measured, deliberate. Officer Thomas, in his mid-40s, scans the car with suspicion, his eyes narrowing as he looks through the window at Marcus. He takes in the sight of the child gripping the wheel, the baby in his arms, and doesn't immediately register the emergency. All he sees is a young black boy behind the wheel. The assumption is already forming in his mind. Marcus's breath catches in his throat, his grip on the baby tightening as he lowers the window. The officer approaches, his voice sharp and demanding. "What are you doing out here?" he asks, his tone harsh, like Marcus has already done something wrong. Marcus's voice shakes, but he tries to stay calm. "I'm trying to get this baby to the hospital. Please, my neighbor. She's sick. He needs help." The officer's gaze shifts from Marcus to the baby and back again. He doesn't see a worried child rushing to save a life. He sees a threat, a black boy in the wrong place at the wrong time. "You're driving a car with no license," Officer Thomas says, his voice filled with skepticism. "Where's your mother? What are you doing with that child?" Marcus stammers, trying to explain, but the words get tangled in his throat. The baby's cries are louder now, almost frantic, and Marcus knows he doesn't have much time. "Please, sir, I just need to get him help," he repeats, his voice more desperate. But the officer isn't listening. His eyes narrow, his hand hovering near his gun as he assesses the situation. "You're just a kid," he says, a sneer creeping into his voice. "How did you get this car? You're not supposed to be driving. And where is your mother? This doesn't make sense." Marcus's heart pounds. The weight of the officer's judgment is suffocating, and all he wants to do is get away from this confrontation so he can save the baby. But the officer isn't done. "Step out of the car," he commands, his voice cold and demanding. Fear seizes Marcus, but he doesn't move. His arms, still wrapped tightly around the baby, don't allow him to get out of the car. He's shaking now, not just from the cold, but from the overwhelming weight of it all. "Please," he whispers, more to himself than the officer. "I just need to get him to the hospital." The officer stands there, eyes locked onto Marcus with the same suspicion, the same prejudice that had clouded his judgment from the moment he saw the boy in the driver's seat. But as the baby's cries reach a fever pitch, something flickers in the officer's eyes. Maybe it's doubt, maybe it's confusion. But for a brief moment, there's a crack in his armor. Marcus doesn't know what happens next. He doesn't know if the officer will see the truth, or if he will continue to let his prejudices control the situation. All he knows is that the life of the baby is at stake. The officer's stance softens for a split second, and then, just as quickly, he straightens up again. The tension in the air thickens. Marcus has done everything right in his eyes. He's just trying to help. But the officer hasn't seen that. He hasn't seen a child acting out of pure necessity. Instead, he's seen a young black boy who doesn't belong in this situation. A child caught in the intersection of racism and a desperate need for help. This moment, brief but electric, will decide whether Marcus can get the help he needs for the baby, or if he'll be punished for something he didn't do. The question hangs heavy in the air. Will the officer see a child in need, or will his prejudice take control and cloud his judgment? Either way, the course of Marcus's life and the baby's depends on the outcome of this simple but life-altering moment. Officer Thomas sat in his patrol car, the soft hum of the engine barely breaking the eerie silence of the empty streets. It was late, almost midnight, and he was on routine patrol. The quiet was broken only by the occasional creak of a distant tree or the low growl of an engine somewhere far off. He was a man in his 40s, having served in law enforcement for more than 2 decades. Known for his quick judgments and no-nonsense attitude, Officer Thomas had a reputation for being tough on crime. But what most people didn't know, what wasn't discussed in the reports, was his deep-seated racial bias. Years of ingrained prejudices shaped how he saw the world, especially when it came to black individuals. He had seen it all, or so he thought. The late-night traffic stops, the suspicious movements, the at-risk areas. In his mind, he understood the way the world worked. And tonight, as he cruised through the streets, something caught his attention that didn't sit right with him. A young black boy driving a car, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, with a baby in his arms. It was a sight that immediately raised red flags. Officer Thomas wasn't one to hesitate. His instincts told him this was a crime, perhaps a kidnapping, or worse, a carjacking gone wrong. There was no way a 12-year-old should be driving at that hour, especially with a baby. His heart rate quickened as his eyes narrowed, scanning the scene. The boy's presence in that car seemed out of place, too young, too vulnerable, and, in Officer Thomas's mind, too suspicious. Without a second thought, he flicked on his siren and pulled in behind the car. His hand rested on the radio as he spoke into the mic, his voice sharp. "Got a possible 1031. Suspect appears to be a juvenile, requesting backup." While Officer Thomas readied himself for the confrontation, Marcus, completely unaware of the officer's prejudices, had only one thing on his mind: getting the baby to safety. Marcus wasn't a criminal, nor was he doing anything illegal. He was a 12-year-old boy who had stepped up to help his neighbors. His mother, a hard-working woman who kept their modest home running, had raised him to always help those in need. Marcus knew how to do what was right, no matter how difficult or scary the situation was. And tonight, he had done just that. His neighbor's baby had been left in his care after her parents couldn't find anyone else to look after her, while they rushed out to handle an emergency. The baby had fallen ill, and, with no one else around, Marcus, despite his fear, had taken charge. The hospital wasn't far, but in the dead of night, with the baby crying in his arms, Marcus was desperate to get there quickly. He knew he wasn't old enough to drive, but in that moment, he didn't care. He had to save her. His heart was pounding, and every passing second felt heavier, the cries of the baby in his arms echoing in his mind. He couldn't afford to waste time. He was so focused on the road ahead that he didn't notice the flashing lights in his rearview mirror until they were too close to ignore. Panic set in as the siren screamed into the night, and Marcus's hands tightened around the wheel. Was it another car? What had he done wrong? He wasn't speeding, wasn't breaking any laws. He was just trying to get to the hospital. The officer's commanding voice broke the silence as he approached the car. "Pull over," Officer Thomas ordered. Marcus's heart skipped a beat, and he nervously veered to the side of the road, his breath coming in quick bursts. His palms were clammy, and the baby's cries seemed to grow louder with every passing second. "Stay calm," Marcus whispered to himself, though his voice trembled. He tried to remember everything his mother had taught him about respecting authority, but his mind was clouded with worry. He knew the stakes were high. One wrong move could end in disaster. As the officer approached the car, Marcus could feel his anxiety tightening in his chest. The officer's uniform, his posture, the way he walked, all of it was intimidating. The last thing Marcus wanted was trouble. But the officer's eyes scanned the situation quickly, seeing only what he wanted to see: a young black boy behind the wheel at night, with a baby in his arms. The officer's gaze hardened, and his suspicion grew. In his mind, Marcus was just another statistic, another black youth involved in something shady, even though Marcus had only been trying to help. The officer didn't take the time to assess the full situation, to understand that the baby in Marcus's arms wasn't his sibling, or a child he'd taken without permission. Number Officer Thomas immediately jumped to conclusions, his deep-rooted biases clouding his judgment. And Marcus, trapped by the officer's assumptions, would have to find a way to prove his innocence, or risk becoming another victim of a broken system. But Marcus wasn't about to let the officer's prejudice define him. He had no idea what Officer Thomas was thinking, but he did know one thing. He had to get to the hospital, and the baby needed help. This wasn't just a bad situation, it was a crisis. But with every second wasted, the chance of getting to the hospital grew slimmer. And as Officer Thomas moved closer, Marcus realized that he was facing something much bigger than a traffic stop. His courage would be tested, and the officer's judgment would determine whether or not a child, an innocent child, could continue on his path to do what was right. The stakes were higher than either of them realized. And in this moment, both Marcus and Officer Thomas stood at a crossroads that would define their futures. The car rolled to a stop, the engine sputtering slightly as Marcus pulled over to the side of the road. The sharp sound of the siren echoed in his ears, mixing with the frantic cries of the baby in his arms. His heart raced as he gripped the wheel tightly, trying to calm his breathing, trying to push away the rising panic. He couldn't afford to panic. Not now. Through the rearview mirror, Marcus saw the police officer's silhouette approach. The bright flash of the patrol car's lights cast an eerie glow over the snow-covered streets, and everything about the scene felt wrong. Marcus was just a 12-year-old boy, caught in the middle of a crisis, and now, it seemed, he was about to be dragged into something far bigger than he ever expected. The officer's footsteps crunched against the snow as he reached the car. Marcus couldn't help but glance at him, his uniform, the badge, the stern face, all adding to the pressure. When the officer reached the window, he leaned in with a gaze that was sharp and intense. "What's a kid like you doing out here with a baby?" Officer Thomas demanded, his voice low and forceful. Marcus swallowed hard, doing his best to steady his nerves. The baby's cries were growing louder, and every second felt like an eternity. He tried to keep his voice calm, tried to explain the situation, but his words didn't seem to matter. "I'm just taking her to the hospital," Marcus said, his voice steady, despite the fear tightening his chest. "Her parents couldn't find anyone else. They needed to go, and I'm helping." The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped back, his eyes scanning the car, taking in the scene. Marcus behind the wheel, a 12-year-old boy in an oversized jacket, clutching the baby who was still wailing. It didn't add up in Officer Thomas's mind. He couldn't fathom why a kid would be driving at this hour, let alone carrying a baby. Something didn't sit right with him. The officer's gaze shifted to Marcus, suspicion deepening with every passing second. He leaned forward, his voice now colder, more accusatory. "You expect me to believe that? A kid like you, driving a car in the middle of the night with a baby? Where are her parents? Why aren't they here?" Marcus's throat tightened. His stomach churned with the weight of the officer's words. He was just trying to help, but the officer wasn't listening. All that mattered was that Marcus didn't fit the officer's idea of what he should be doing. In his mind, a black boy at this hour, in a car with a child, was a threat. And so, Marcus found himself in a situation where his innocence wasn't enough to prevent the looming judgment. "I don't know where they are," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper now. "They were in a rush. They just asked me to take her." Officer Thomas didn't let up. "You're telling me you're just out here, driving a car with a baby in your arms, and you expect me to believe you? You're not old enough to be driving, boy. I've seen this before." His words were laced with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion, each syllable heavier than the last. The baby's cries grew louder, and the tension between them deepened. Marcus's chest felt tight, the weight of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just a simple traffic stop anymore. This was an accusation, an interrogation. And Marcus couldn't understand why the officer wasn't hearing him. He was just trying to do the right thing. Yet all Officer Thomas could see was a threat. A child who didn't belong behind the wheel. A black kid who couldn't possibly have a legitimate reason for being out at this hour. Marcus's mind raced, his thoughts running in different directions. What if the officer didn't believe him? What if he arrested him? What would happen to the baby then? He couldn't stop thinking about the child in his arms, her soft cries a constant reminder of the urgency of the situation. The hospital was so close, but the officer's questions and doubts were keeping him from moving forward. "Please," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "She needs help. We need to get to the hospital." Officer Thomas paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he took in Marcus's pleading expression. But he didn't soften. Instead, he shifted his stance, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'm not buying your story, kid. I think you're hiding something. Maybe I should call for backup." Every word from the officer felt like a punch to Marcus's gut. He didn't know how to explain himself any better. He didn't know what else to say. He was just a child. He had no experience dealing with situations like this. He had only ever been taught to trust the police, to be respectful. But now, in this moment, respect felt like it wouldn't be enough. The baby continued to cry in his arms, her tiny face scrunching up in discomfort. And it was all Marcus could do to hold back his own tears. He needed to get the baby to the hospital. He needed to make the officers see that he wasn't the enemy, that he wasn't a criminal, that he was just a kid trying to do the right thing. "Please," Marcus repeated, his voice desperate now. "She's sick. I have to get her help. I'm not doing anything wrong." The officer's eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, but the suspicion still lingered. It was clear that he hadn't decided what to do yet. But in that moment, Marcus was more than just scared. He was also determined. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to let his race or the officer's assumptions stop him from doing what needed to be done. "What's your name, kid?" Officer Thomas asked, his tone shifting slightly. "Marcus," the boy answered quickly. "Marcus Williams." The officer held his gaze for a moment longer before he straightened up, his mind still reeling with questions. But Marcus wasn't about to wait for more interrogation. He gently rocked the baby in his arms, trying to soothe her, and with one last look at the officer, he made up his mind. He wasn't going to let fear control him. "Please, just let me go," Marcus said, his voice firm. "She needs help." And in that moment, it was clear that Marcus had taken charge. The officer's next move would be pivotal, but so would Marcus's choice. Would the officer listen, or would prejudice continue to shape his decisions? Only time would tell. As Officer Thomas stood there, still gripping the side of Marcus's car, his eyes wandered over the interior one last time. He scanned the baby bag on the passenger seat, his gaze lingering over its contents. It was then that his eyes landed on something, a small birth certificate, tucked neatly inside the bag. The officer hesitated for a moment, before reaching in and pulling it out, unfolding it with a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. Marcus watched the officer closely, his stomach tight with unease, as the officer read over the document. The baby's name, date of birth, and the names of her parents were all clearly listed, but it was the family name that caught Officer Thomas's attention. It was a name that carried weight in the town, the kind of name that opened doors, that commanded respect, and that could change the course of an entire career. The officer's eyes widened as he connected the dots. The baby in Marcus's arms was the daughter of one of the most influential families in town. A wave of realization hit Officer Thomas like a cold slap. His face, once stern and accusatory, drained of color as the full gravity of his mistake settled in. The officer's posture stiffened, and his earlier aggression shifted into visible discomfort. His eyes flicked from the birth certificate to Marcus, the child he had wrongly assumed was a criminal. The officer stammered for a moment, his words stumbling out. I didn't know. Officer Thomas began, but his voice trailed off, unable to fully process the weight of his error. Marcus, meanwhile, remained calm, unwavering in his stance. His eyes met the officer's, but there was no anger or frustration in his gaze, just a quiet, steady resolve. "You were wrong," Marcus said simply, his voice cool but firm. "I didn't need your judgment. I was just trying to help." The officer swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of his own actions. He had wrongly judged this young boy based on nothing more than assumptions and prejudice. And now The truth was in front of him. He glanced down at the birth certificate again, as if hoping it might somehow explain away his behavior. But it couldn't. The damage had already been done. I'm sorry, Officer Thomas stammered, his face flushing with embarrassment. I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean to make you feel like... But Marcus wasn't interested in the apology. He wasn't looking for an admission of guilt or regret. Instead, he looked at the officer with quiet dignity and said, "You don't need to apologize. You need to understand that I don't have to prove anything to you. You just have to respect me and know that I was right all along." The words hung in the cold night air, the truth resonating in the silence between them. Marcus had been the one to act selflessly, the one to step up when no one else would, while Officer Thomas had let his biases dictate his actions. The officer's face reddened even more, clearly embarrassed as the reality of his own prejudice hit him full force. He had acted out of ignorance, assuming the worst without taking a moment to truly understand the situation. And now, standing before the very child he had wrongly accused, he was forced to confront the consequences of his assumptions. But the damage was done. The officer's professional pride had been shattered, and his reputation, shaped by years of unchecked bias, was now under scrutiny. "Go ahead," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Take the birth certificate. Do what you need to do. But remember, I didn't do anything wrong, and you shouldn't judge people based on what you think you know." The officer looked at Marcus, his discomfort palpable. He had no more words to offer. The damage wasn't something that could be undone with a simple apology. Marcus had not only proven that he was right, but he had forced Officer Thomas to reckon with his own prejudices, and in that moment, Marcus had gained something far more valuable than an apology. He had gained respect, and he had exposed the harsh reality of racial assumptions. As Officer Thomas stepped back, still processing the truth, Marcus gently rocked the baby in his arms, his focus returning to the task at hand. He wasn't going to let the officer's mistake stop him. The baby needed to get to the hospital, and that was all that mattered now. With a final glance at the officer, Marcus started the car again, the engine humming to life. Officer Thomas stood there, watching him go, a man shaken by his own error, a man who for once had learned a lesson that he would not soon forget. The car pulled away, the baby's cries now softened as Marcus continued his journey. The weight of the moment lingered, but for Marcus there was no looking back. He had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were wrongly judged based on assumptions? Where are you watching from, and what time is it? As Marcus drove away, his grip on the wheel remained steady, his mind fixed on the most important task at hand, getting the baby to the hospital. The encounter with Officer Thomas had been jarring, but he refused to let it shake him. He had no time for anger, no energy to waste on resentment. The baby's well-being was all that mattered. The cries from the infant had softened slightly, but Marcus knew there wasn't a second to spare. Meanwhile, Officer Thomas stood frozen in place, watching the taillights disappear down the dimly lit road. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the realization of what had just transpired. For years, he had relied on his instincts, his authority unquestioned, his biases unchecked. Tonight, however, his gut reaction had led him down a path of humiliation. The truth had unraveled in front of him, and there had been no way to spin it. He had been wrong, completely, undeniably wrong. Back at the precinct, word of the incident spread quickly. Dashcam footage, paired with reports from dispatch and onlookers, painted a damning picture of Officer Thomas's conduct. His reputation, once unchallenged among his peers, was now under scrutiny. Complaints from the past, ones that had once been ignored, resurfaced. Patterns of racial profiling, cases dismissed under technicalities, and encounters brushed under the rug suddenly demanded attention. By the following morning, the department had launched a formal investigation into his history of policing. The chief, upon reviewing the evidence, had little choice but to suspend Thomas pending further review. The weight of his actions, long dismissed as routine policing, had finally caught up with him. The officer, who once thrived on unchecked authority, now found himself cornered by the very system he had so often exploited. Meanwhile, Marcus arrived at the hospital. The ER doors slid open with a whoosh, the warm air inside offering a stark contrast to the biting cold of the night. Nurses and doctors rushed toward him as he carried the baby inside, his face calm, despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. She needs help," he said, breathless, his arms tightening around the small bundle in his hands. A nurse quickly took the baby from him, her expression softening as she realized just how young Marcus was. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. We'll take care of her now." Marcus exhaled, nodding. He had done his part. He had done what was right, no matter the obstacles that had tried to stand in his way. News of Marcus's act of courage spread quickly. By the next day, the local media picked up the story. 12-year-old boy saves baby after harrowing journey to hospital. Reporters wanted to know more about him, about his bravery, about his unshaken determination in the face of injustice. The community, inspired by Marcus's actions, rallied behind him. People who had once remained silent about their own experiences with racial profiling now spoke out. The incident became a catalyst for conversations about police reform, about the dangers of unchecked bias, and about the quiet power of truth. Officer Thomas, once a respected figure in the precinct, became a symbol of everything that needed to change. His name, no longer associated with authority, was now synonymous with prejudice and wrongful assumptions. His career, though not officially over, had been irreversibly damaged. He had spent years thinking he understood the world, but in one night, a 12-year-old had shattered everything he thought he knew. Marcus, however, had no interest in fame or recognition. When asked how he felt about the officer facing consequences, he simply shrugged and said, "It's not about him. It was never about him. I just wanted to do the right thing." And that was the lesson that remained. In a world where prejudice could cloud judgment and strip people of their dignity, Marcus had proven that integrity and truth would always shine through. His story was not just about a confrontation with a racist cop. It was about perseverance, about fighting for what's right, and about the courage of a child who refused to be underestimated. As Marcus walked out of the hospital, hands in his pockets, the weight of the night settling in, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like himself, a boy who had simply chosen to do the right thing, even when the world had tried to stand in his way. As the weight of his actions settled in, Officer Thomas sat in the police precinct, staring at the blank walls of an internal affairs office. The world outside moved forward, but for him, everything had come to a screeching halt. He had been placed on immediate administrative leave, while an investigation into his history of racial profiling was underway. The dash-cam footage from his cruiser, combined with Marcus's calm yet firm recounting of the events, painted a clear picture. Officer Thomas had not only wrongfully detained a child acting in a life-saving emergency, but it also let his biases dictate his response. The media wasted no time in reporting on the case, and within hours, outrage flooded the community. Citizens demanded accountability, activists called for justice, and even members within the police force could no longer turn a blind eye. By the next morning, the police chief held a press conference. With cameras flashing and microphones capturing every word, the chief announced that Officer Thomas had been officially suspended without pay. His record was being reviewed, and his past encounters, many of which had been previously dismissed, were now being re-examined. Several complaints from black and brown citizens, once ignored, were resurfacing, forcing the department to confront the systemic biases within its ranks. As public pressure mounted, the city's mayor weighed in. "Racial profiling has no place in our police force," she stated firmly. "Officer Thomas's actions are a reflection of a deeper issue we must address. We will not allow injustice to go unpunished." The final blow came a week later. Officer Thomas, once respected among his peers, was officially terminated from the force. The department cited repeated misconduct, bias-driven policing, and abuse of power as reasons for his dismissal. His reputation, once upheld by the shield he wore, was now in ruins. While some officers expressed quiet solidarity with him, the truth was undeniable. He had failed to uphold the values of justice and fairness. And now, for the first time, he was experiencing the consequences of the system he had so often used against others. As Marcus sat with his mother, watching the news coverage of Thomas's firing, he felt no sense of triumph, only quiet relief. He hadn't needed an apology. He hadn't needed acknowledgement. What mattered was that justice had been served. And for the first time in a long time, the city saw a glimpse of what accountability truly looked like. As the news of Officer Thomas's dismissal spread, the city was left to reflect on the power of accountability. Marcus's story wasn't just about a boy doing the right thing. It was about how deeply ingrained biases can turn a moment of urgency into a moment of injustice. But even in the face of prejudice, truth prevailed. Marcus didn't need validation from the officer who doubted him. He didn't need recognition or apologies. All he cared about was ensuring the baby's safety, and in doing so, he unknowingly exposed the cracks in a system that had failed too many before him. His quiet defiance and unwavering sense of duty forced people to question their own judgments. How many times had they assumed the worst without knowing the truth? How often had someone been unfairly targeted just because of who they were? For Officer Thomas, the consequences were unavoidable. His badge, once a symbol of authority, had become a reminder of his failure. But this was bigger than just one officer losing his job. It was about acknowledging the harm caused by racial profiling and systemic injustice. It was about recognizing that a child's life had been put at risk simply because of an officer's refusal to see past his own prejudices. The community response was overwhelming. Activists used Marcus's story to push for reform, calling for better training, accountability, and a shift in the way officers interacted with people of color. Parents used his experience as a lesson for their children, an example of why standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity, is always worth it. And for Marcus himself, the experience left him with a sense of clarity. He had done what needed to be done, not for praise, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued his life as any 12-year-old would. He went to school, spent time with his friends, and helped his mother when she needed him. But there was something different now, an unspoken respect from those who once overlooked him. His actions had proven that courage isn't about size, age, or power. It's about standing firm when it matters most. Let this story be a reminder. Truth will always outweigh prejudice, and the smallest act of kindness can shift the course of history. Marcus didn't just save a baby. He changed the course of an officer's life and challenged a broken system. He proved that in the face of bias, integrity is the strongest weapon of all. The sun was starting to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the city. The air was thick with the hum of traffic, the chatter of people heading home after a long day, and the distant sounds of the bustling urban life that never seemed to stop. But amid all that noise, there was a voice that stood out. A child's cry, raw and desperate. Lucas, an 8-year-old boy, his small frame dwarfed by the towering buildings around him, sprinted down the crowded street. His knees were scraped, his clothes torn, and his breath came in short, panicked gasps. Tears streamed down his face, blurring his vision, but he didn't care. All that mattered was getting help. The image of his mother being dragged away by authorities haunted him. He couldn't lose her. He just couldn't. "Help! Please! Somebody help!" Lucas's voice cracked as he shouted, his words swallowed up by the noise of the street, but still desperate enough to pierce through the chaos. He ran past groups of people who didn't spare him a second glance, his fear and desperation barely registering in their busy minds. For a moment, the city seemed like a cold, indifferent place. Nobody stopped. Nobody moved. Lucas's cries echoed off the walls of the buildings, only to be swallowed by the noise of the world continuing to spin. At the end of the street, Officer Thompson, a man whose uniform symbolized authority and power, was patrolling the area. He walked slowly, scanning the scene with a practiced eye, looking for trouble, as he had done countless times before. His job was simple: keep the peace, enforce the law, and ensure that nothing went wrong. He was used to dealing with rowdy teenagers, petty criminals, and the occasional fight. But this was different. As he heard Lucas's frantic cries, something tugged at his chest. He paused, eyes narrowing as he looked down the street. There, in the distance, was the source of the distress. A young boy, alone, running wildly through the crowd. Officer Thompson's instincts kicked in, but they were clouded by years of bias, years of assumptions based on his experiences and preconceived notions. It didn't help that Lucas was black, a fact that subtly shaped Thompson's perceptions, even if he didn't consciously recognize it. The officer hesitated. Was the child in real danger? Was there something more to this story? Thompson had dealt with situations before where the truth wasn't what it seemed. Was this just another attempt to cause trouble, or was something deeper happening? His grip on his baton tightened, his mind running through possibilities. The boy was crying, but how often did people cry wolf? "Hey, you there!" Officer Thompson called out, striding toward Lucas. His voice was stern, the words more of an order than a question. The boy didn't stop running, his face still contorted with fear, his body trembling. "Please, help! My mom! They took her! They're gonna hurt her!" Lucas's voice shook, but his words were clear. He stopped just in front of the officer, chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. His small hands were raised, palms facing out in a gesture that was part plea, part protection, as if the officer's presence only made his fear worse. Officer Thompson stood there, his hand hovering near his holstered gun, as his gaze flickered from the boy to the busy street. He took a moment, scanning Lucas up and down. his tear-streaked face, his disheveled clothes, and the way his little body seemed to collapse under the weight of the emotions overwhelming him. Lucas was wearing a faded blue t-shirt, too big for his frame, and a pair of scuffed jeans. The shoes on his feet were mismatched, showing signs of wear. The backpack slung over his shoulder hung loosely, with only a few toys peeking out. He looked every bit the part of a scared child, desperate for help. Still, the officer's mind churned with doubt. He had seen so many lies, so many false reports, so many attempts to manipulate situations. Could this be one of those times? Could this just be a misunderstanding? His instincts, shaped by years of dealing with a community that often distrusted him, told him to be wary. But then, Lucas's next words broke through the officer's thoughts like a knife cutting through fog. "They took her. They took my mom, and they're gonna hurt her if we don't stop them. Please, you have to help me." The boy's voice cracked again, his body trembling with emotion that threatened to break him apart. The words hit Officer Thompson hard, shaking him to his core. He had no reason to doubt the boy now. The raw fear in Lucas's eyes, the sincerity in his voice, were too real to ignore. Despite his biases, despite the assumptions that had clouded his judgment just moments ago, Thompson felt the grip of something different: guilt. It was in that moment, as Lucas's innocent plea hung in the air, that the officer realized the weight of what had just happened. Lucas's voice had shattered not only his perception of this situation, but also the walls he had built around himself. The boy's cry for help had cracked open a part of Officer Thompson's worldview that he hadn't even known was locked away. The officer looked down at Lucas, and for the first time, he didn't see just a child. He saw a person in pain, a person desperate for someone to believe him. It was too late to question the boy's sincerity. In the brief silence that followed, Officer Thompson's face softened, and his skepticism faded. "I'll help you," he said quietly, finally seeing the truth in Lucas's eyes. "Tell me where they took your mom." Lucas, trembling and still unsure, pointed shakily down the street, toward the flashing lights of the authorities ahead. And for the first time, Officer Thompson began to believe. Lucas had lived in a neighborhood where every day felt like a struggle to survive. It was a place where the streets were worn, the buildings were aging, and the air was thick with the weight of inequality. He had seen firsthand how the world viewed people like him, black, poor, and caught in a system that was designed to keep them down. The fear that gripped his heart every time a siren blared or a police car rolled down the street wasn't just a feeling. It was a reality he carried with him every day. His mother, a hard-working woman who had done everything she could to provide for him, was no stranger to the harsh realities of the world they lived in. She worked 2 jobs, often staying up late into the night, just to make sure that Lucas had enough to eat and a roof over his head. But no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she sacrificed, the world still saw her as less than, seen through the lens of prejudice and bias that ran deep within the fabric of their society. It wasn't just the looks she received when she walked into stores, or the whispers that followed her as she crossed the street. It was the way the police treated her. Lucas had been old enough to understand for a while now that his mother, despite her dedication and hard work, was viewed with suspicion wherever she went. She had been pulled over by police more times than he could count, often for trivial reasons. Her car wasn't new enough, or she had been driving just a little too fast, or sometimes there was no reason at all, just a decision that she looked out of place in a neighborhood where people like her didn't belong. Lucas had witnessed these moments, sitting in the passenger seat of her car, his small hands gripping the armrest as the police officer's cold eyes met his mother's, as though she were the one causing trouble simply by existing in their sight line. When Lucas was younger, he didn't fully understand why it happened. But now, as he was growing older, he was starting to see the pattern, a system that treated his mother like a criminal without cause, simply because of the color of her skin. He had seen it when she was unfairly dismissed from jobs, when she was made to wait longer than others in stores, when people looked at her as if she were invisible, or worse, a threat, how it made her feel. She would come home, her shoulders slumped from the weight of the day, and she'd try to smile for him, as if everything was fine. But Lucas knew it wasn't. He could see it in the lines etched into her face, the weariness that seemed to grow with each passing day. And despite all her efforts to shield him from the worst of it, Lucas felt the weight of it too. He was starting to understand that the world was not a kind place, not for people like him, and not for people like his mother. In their neighborhood, the division was impossible to ignore. On one side, there were the pristine, affluent White Sea, but what hurt Lucas most wasn't just seeing the way the world treated his mother. It was seeing immunities, neighborhoods that boasted manicured lawns, perfect homes, and families that rarely, if ever, had to worry about anything beyond what's for dinner. But on the other side of the tracks, the reality was starkly different. Families like Lucas's lived in homes that were crumbling, their streets full of potholes, their parks neglected, and their schools underfunded. This divide wasn't just physical. It ran deeper, into the very core of the city's identity. The systemic racism that plagued every aspect of their lives was a constant reminder that they weren't truly part of the city. They were separated, isolated, and, in the eyes of so many, irrelevant. Lucas had grown up in this world, where hope was a fleeting thought, and every step he took felt like one in the shadow of a system that would never see him as equal. His mother had tried to explain things to him in small doses as he grew older. She had tried to shield him from the worst of the world while also teaching him about it. She'd spoken to him about how people would see him differently when he got older, how they would treat him as if he didn't belong, just like they treated her. She had tried to prepare him, but no amount of preparation could shield him from the truth that he was now facing, the truth that the system was against him, that his skin color was something that could define his entire life. And now, Lucas's fear had crystallized into something tangible. His mother had been taken by the authorities, just as she had been taken before, but this time it felt different. This time it wasn't just a routine stop. This time Lucas could feel in his bones that something much worse was happening. The city's pervasive injustice had reached into his life once again, and this time he had no control. The fear that Lucas carried with him wasn't just the fear of losing his mother. It was the fear of losing everything, of being powerless, just like his mother had been so many times before. It was the fear that, despite everything she had done for him, despite the love and sacrifices she had given, the world would never truly care about them. And that was why, in that moment of desperation, Lucas didn't just cry out for help. He cried out for justice. He cried out for someone, anyone, to see him and his mother for who they really were. Not as problems to be dealt with, but as human beings who deserved dignity, respect, and love. The city's broken system had been shaping Lucas's world from the start, but in his frantic cry he hoped, just for a moment, that someone would listen, that someone would hear the truth in his words and do something about it. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted down the street, his small feet slapping against the cracked pavement. His breath came in desperate gasps, each one heavier than the last, as the adrenaline surged through his veins. His mother. They had taken her. She was supposed to be at home, resting, but now she was gone, taken by people who didn't care about her, didn't care about him. The city seemed to blur around him, its towering buildings and bustling streets nothing more than a backdrop to his panic. The world felt too big, too cold for a boy of his size, but in this moment, all that mattered was getting to the one person who could help. Officer Thompson. He had seen the officer many times before, standing at street corners, watching over the neighborhood. Lucas didn't know him personally, but he knew that officers like Thompson were supposed to keep the peace. They were supposed to protect people. That's what he had been taught. "Help! They took Mommy!" Lucas screamed, his voice cracking with fear. His legs burned as he ran faster, desperately hoping someone would hear him, someone would listen. He wasn't sure where to go, but Officer Thompson was close, just up ahead. The officer was leaning against his patrol car, his eyes scanning the street with a watchful gaze, seemingly unfazed by the chaos unfolding just a few blocks away. The sight of him should have brought comfort, but instead Lucas felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. What if the officer didn't believe him? What if no one did? Lucas's mind raced with thoughts he couldn't quite organize, a jumble of fear and confusion. He had no time for the doubts. His mother needed him, and Officer Thompson was the only person in uniform he had ever seen up close, the only one who could help. As he drew closer, Lucas's small voice trembled with panic. "Please, officer, they took my Mommy. You have to help me." Officer Thompson looked down at the boy, his expression unreadable. The officer was in his 40s, his face lined with the weariness of years spent in the force. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. But there was something about his eyes, something cold, skeptical. Thompson stood straight, one hand resting on the side of his patrol car, the other clasped loosely around his belt. His gaze flickered over Lucas, taking in the sight of the terrified child, his face streaked with tears, his clothes rumpled from the frantic sprint. But his mind, shaped by years of racial bias and hardened by countless interactions in neighborhoods like this one, hesitated. He had seen children in distress before, but they weren't always telling the truth. Too many times he'd dealt with situations that turned out to be exaggerated stories, misunderstandings that only added to the confusion of his daily work. "Are you sure, kid?" Officer Thompson's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a weariness from dealing with more false alarms than he cared to remember. "Where did they take your mom?" Lucas shook his head frantically, his voice cracking again. "I don't know. I saw them take her. They put her in a van. Please, officer, you have to help." His hands were trembling, and he instinctively wiped his nose with the back of his hand, too distraught to care about the smudges of dirt or the tears that blurred his vision. Officer Thompson watched him for a moment longer, the skepticism still hanging in the air between them. His experience with this community, this neighborhood where kids often got into trouble, where families were constantly under scrutiny, taught him to question every story. Every time an incident like this came up, there was always a chance it wasn't as serious as it seemed. It was possible, he thought, that Lucas was just upset, that maybe he had imagined the whole thing, or that the boy had misunderstood the situation. But something about the child's urgency, the way his hands gripped at his sides, his wild eyes darting to every passing car, as though he were afraid the van might come back, made Thompson hesitate. The officer had seen children like Lucas before, kids from broken homes, from neighborhoods where survival was an everyday struggle. He had learned to distance himself emotionally from the chaos around him, to separate his personal feelings from his work. But now, standing before this boy, Thompson could feel the weight of his own hesitation pressing against him. Something wasn't right. He shifted his weight, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of the situation. "Look, kid. Calm down. We'll find your mom," Thompson said. But his words lacked the reassurance they should have carried. The thought of chasing down a van for an emotional outburst made him hesitate. This wasn't his usual routine. His instincts, formed over years of policing, told him this might just be another case of overreacting. But something in the boy's voice, in the frantic pleading, told him otherwise. Lucas stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. "I'm not lying. Please, please help me." His voice cracked with desperation, his small body trembling as though the fear and the tension were too much to hold. Officer Thompson stood still, his expression unreadable. He glanced toward his patrol car, his fingers twitching slightly as he debated what to do next. He could ignore this, pretend it was just a child's outburst. But there was something gnawing at him, a small voice deep down telling him he couldn't afford to make that mistake. "Okay," he finally said, his tone still guarded but less dismissive. "I'll call it in. Stay here. I'm going to check it out." Lucas nodded, relief flooding through him, though the fear still clenched at his chest. He hadn't been sure if the officer would believe him, but now he had a chance. Now, maybe, just maybe, someone would listen. Officer Thompson's pulse quickened as he stared at the phone in his hand, the number for the precinct's dispatch center still glowing on the screen. He had made the call, and now he was waiting. Lucas, the small, scared boy who had run to him for help, stood beside him, eyes wide and filled with hope. He hadn't let go of Thompson's side since the officer promised to help. The boy's trust was palpable, almost suffocating in its intensity, and Thompson could feel the weight of it, pushing him to act faster, harder, with more resolve than he had ever felt before. Lucas had been right. His mother had been taken. The reality of that truth sank deep into Thompson's bones, as he thought about how many times he had seen similar situations unfold in this neighborhood, situations where the system had been just as unforgiving and unjust. But he had turned a blind eye. He had never questioned it before. It had always seemed like a way of life, the way things worked. But now, standing at the precipice of a moral dilemma, he could no longer ignore the truth. "Where are they holding her?" Thompson muttered, more to himself than to Lucas. Lucas pointed ahead, the street lights casting long shadows on the pavement. They took her to the old station on Maple Street, the one by the warehouse. Thompson nodded, his mind already racing through the details. He had heard of that station. Rumors of corruption had floated through the force for years, but he had dismissed them, chalking them up to nothing more than hearsay. But now, with the boy's mother in the hands of the very system Thompson had once blindly served, the truth was becoming all too real. "Stay close, Lucas," Thompson said, his voice low but firm, the gravity of the situation clear in his tone. "We're going to get your mom." They both moved quickly through the quiet streets, the silence around them heavy with the tension of what was to come. Lucas's footsteps were quick and nervous, his small body still shaking from the fear and uncertainty. Thompson's own heart raced as they neared the old station, the shadows growing longer with each step. The station itself was a dark, run-down building, its cracked windows offering no hint of what lay inside. The air was thick with the smell of oil and concrete, the very air of decay and neglect. This was no ordinary precinct. This was the heart of something much darker. As they approached the entrance, Thompson's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the message. Backup had arrived. But there was no turning back now. It was time to face what had been hidden in plain sight for far too long. "We're here," Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas's face was tense, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes, the first since the moment they had spoken. He was starting to believe that things might actually be okay, that his cries for help hadn't been in vain. Thompson pushed the door open, his body tense, ready for whatever confrontation might await. Inside, a small group of officers stood around, casual as if they didn't have a care in the world. But Thompson knew them. He recognized their faces and the way they carried themselves. These were the same officers who had taken Lucas's mother, the same ones who had been involved in the ongoing corruption that festered beneath the surface of the department. As he stepped further into the dimly lit room, one of the officers looked up, his eyes narrowing when he saw Thompson. There was no warmth, no surprise, just a cold recognition of a man who had once been part of their system, a man who had now turned his back on everything he had stood for. "Thompson," the officer greeted him curtly, his voice carrying a tone of disdain. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to see a woman who you and your boys have illegally detained," Thompson replied, his voice steady but filled with an anger he could no longer contain. "And I'm here to make sure she's released. Now." The officers in the room exchanged looks, their faces unreadable, but the tension was palpable. Thompson knew what they were capable of. These men didn't just break the law, they lived in it, operated under it, twisted it to fit their own needs, and Thompson had been complicit in their system for far too long. "Get out of the way, Thompson," one of the officers spat, his hand twitching near his holstered gun. "You don't know what you're talking about. This is how it works." Thompson's hand went to his own gun, but it wasn't the weapon he was reaching for. It was his badge. He held it up, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Number. This is not how it works. Not anymore." The room went silent, and for a brief moment Thompson wasn't just another officer. He wasn't part of the system anymore. He was standing for something bigger, for justice, for a boy who had lost his mother and was afraid he would never see her again. He was standing for the truth that had been buried for too long. "Get her out of here," Thompson commanded. "Now." The officers hesitated, but they knew what would happen if they pushed back. The entire department was under scrutiny, and Thompson's words had the weight of truth behind them. There would be no covering this up. After a tense moment, the door to the back room creaked open, and Lucas's mother, her face pale but relieved, stepped into the light. Lucas rushed to her, throwing himself into her arms, his tears a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Mommy, you're okay," he sobbed, his small voice cracking with emotion. Lucas's mother wrapped him in her arms, holding him tight, as though she feared she might lose him again. She looked up at Thompson, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. Thompson nodded, a rare sense of peace settling in his chest. "It's not over, but it's a start." As they left the building, the weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. For the first time, Officer Thompson didn't just feel like a cog in the machine. He felt like he had made a difference, even if it was just for one boy and his mother. And as Lucas and his mom walked away, hand in hand, Thompson knew the fight wasn't over. But it was a fight he was now ready to face. In a world where voices are often silenced by prejudice, Lucas's desperate plea for help sparked a change. It wasn't just a cry for his mother. It was a call that reverberated through the system and shook Officer Thompson to his core. Lucas's small voice, filled with fear and urgency, acted as a catalyst for something bigger, a reckoning that stretched beyond one officer, beyond one child, to the very heart of a broken system. When Officer Thompson first encountered Lucas, he had been unsure, skeptical, dismissive even. He was a man shaped by years of ingrained assumptions, a product of the biases that run deep within systems of authority. For him, the world had always been a certain way. His perspective had been narrow, and he never truly questioned the narratives that had been handed to him, until that moment when he found himself face to face with a frightened boy, standing at the crossroads of justice and indifference. Lucas, with his desperate plea, became the turning point not only in his own life, but in the officer's as well. The officer's internal conflict wasn't just about a boy needing help. It was about his entire worldview crumbling in real time. In that moment, Officer Thompson realized that he could no longer stand on the sidelines. He couldn't ignore what was happening in front of him. His biases had led him to doubt Lucas when the boy needed him the most, and now, as he looked back on his actions, he saw just how much harm had been caused by that skepticism. But it was also in this realization that his transformation began. Lucas had shown him a new path, a path of empathy, where doing what was right meant confronting uncomfortable truths. The weight of that understanding hit Thompson hard, but with it came a sense of responsibility. It wasn't enough to simply recognize the problem. He had to take action. He had to challenge the system he had once upheld without question. And in that pivotal moment when Lucas's cries led them to the truth, Thompson knew that he had to stand up. He had to break free from the silence that perpetuated injustice. Lucas, in his innocence, had unknowingly forced that change. His actions didn't just save his mother. They saved an officer from remaining complicit in a broken system. He showed Thompson that courage doesn't come from power or authority. It comes from the truth, no matter how small or how seemingly insignificant it may appear. The release of Lucas's mother from the hands of corrupt officers was a victory, but it wasn't the end of the fight. It was a single moment, a small victory in the larger war against systemic racism, but it was also a step toward something more significant. Officer Thompson, having confronted his own biases, could now look at the world through a different lens. He could no longer be a passive observer in the fight for justice. He had learned that justice wasn't just about enforcing laws. It was about upholding the rights and dignity of every individual, regardless of their race or background. As Lucas and his mother walked away from the old station, hand in hand, their future uncertain but safer than it had been moments before, Thompson felt the weight of the change he had just gone through. He had seen firsthand how a single voice, one that many would have ignored or silenced, could alter the course of an entire situation. And in that voice, he had found his own redemption. Lucas's bravery was a reminder that justice is often sparked by those who have the least power to demand it. It's not always the loudest voices that make the difference, but the quiet cries for help that break through the noise. This was Lucas's gift to Officer Thompson, the lesson that even the smallest act of courage can disrupt the status quo and set a new course for change. Viewer engagement. Question: have you ever been in a position to challenge what you thought you knew? How can we break down the barriers of prejudice in our society? Think about the moments when you were faced with your own biases or preconceived notions. How did you handle them? And how can we, as individuals, challenge these ideas to create a world where empathy and justice triumph over ignorance and prejudice? The police precinct was alive with the hum of a busy morning. Officers moved between desks, coffee cups in hand, exchanging banter and discussing the day ahead. Among them was Officer Bradshaw, a middle-aged cop known for his brash attitude and unchecked arrogance. For years, his behavior had gone unquestioned, and his reputation for making demeaning remarks about civilians, especially minorities, was well known but rarely addressed. The precinct door swung open, and a black woman stepped inside. She carried herself with an air of confidence, her tailored leather jacket and polished boots setting her apart from the usual crowd. Her presence was commanding but understated, immediately drawing attention from the officers scattered around the room. Some paused mid-conversation to glance her way, while others dismissed her with fleeting curiosity. She scanned the room quietly, observing the environment with calm composure, as though sizing up her surroundings. Before she could speak, Bradshaw locked eyes with her. He leaned back in his chair, his coffee steaming in hand, and muttered to a nearby officer loud enough for her to hear, "Looks like someone wandered into the wrong place. Bet she's here to complain about parking tickets." A few officers chuckled nervously, unsure how to respond. The woman didn't react. Instead, she stepped further into the precinct, her heels clicking purposefully against the tiled floor. Her lack of response seemed to irritate Bradshaw, who took her silence as a challenge. "Hey!" he called out, his tone sharper. "Can I help you, or are you just here to waste everyone's time?" The woman finally turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. "I'm here on official business," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the din of the room. Bradshaw scoffed, his arrogance flaring. "Official business? Dressed like that? Who do you think you are, strolling in here like you own the place?" Before she could respond, Bradshaw stood, his coffee cup in hand. He approached her with deliberate steps, his smirk widening as he took in her appearance. "Let me guess," he sneered. "Lost? Looking for your boyfriend? Or maybe you're here to make a complaint about how unfair the world is." The room fell silent. Officers who had been laughing moments earlier now exchanged uneasy glances. Bradshaw's tone had crossed a line, but no one dared to intervene. The woman's calm demeanor remained unshaken as she held his gaze. When her composure didn't falter, Bradshaw's irritation grew. In an impulsive show of dominance, he lifted his coffee cup and pretended to offer it to her, then intentionally tilted it forward, spilling the hot liquid onto her jacket. The room collectively gasped, the audacity of his actions stunning even those who had initially found his remarks amusing. The woman looked down briefly at her stained jacket, then back at Bradshaw, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the room stood still. Unbeknownst to Bradshaw, this was no ordinary visitor. Within moments, the precinct would learn the truth. The woman standing before them wasn't just any civilian. She was their new police chief, here to assess the very officers she would now command. The new police chief, Angela Daniels, had spent her life navigating spaces where she was often underestimated. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, she had seen firsthand how systemic injustices affected communities like hers. Instead of succumbing to bitterness, Angela turned those experiences into fuel, committing herself to becoming an agent of change. Her academic journey was marked by excellence. She graduated at the top of her class from a prestigious law enforcement academy, earning accolades for her sharp intellect and ability to lead. Early in her career, Angela made a name for herself by cracking complex cases and addressing issues of corruption within her department. Her fearless approach to justice and reform earned her both admiration and animosity. Angela wasn't just a trailblazer in her field. She was also a black woman challenging the status quo in an institution resistant to change. When she was appointed police chief in her previous city, Angela inherited a department riddled with inefficiencies and entrenched biases. Through unrelenting effort, she turned it around, introducing comprehensive training programs on de-escalation, implicit bias, and community engagement. Crime rates dropped, and public trust in the department rose significantly. Her successes didn't go unnoticed. She was soon tapped to lead reforms in another precinct plagued by complaints of officer misconduct and systemic discrimination. Angela's new role brought her to a precinct with a reputation for harboring officers resistant to accountability. For years, residents had voiced concerns about unchecked behavior, especially regarding racial profiling and unprofessional conduct. Her mission was clear: transform the culture, hold officers accountable, and rebuild trust between the department and the community. But Angela knew change wouldn't come easily. Many within the precinct viewed her appointment as a threat to their comfortable status quo, and she was prepared to face resistance head-on. Meanwhile, Officer Bradshaw, a mid-level cop with over a decade on the force, had built a reputation of his own, though for vastly different reasons. Bradshaw wasn't known for his dedication to justice or community service. Instead, his record was littered with complaints ranging from verbal harassment to questionable use of authority. His colleagues knew him as a loud, opinionated presence in the precinct, someone who prided himself on being old school in his methods and unapologetically abrasive. Bradshaw's behavior had long been the subject of internal reviews, but nothing ever came of the complaints. Some officers avoided working with him, while others quietly tolerated his antics to keep the peace. Bradshaw's confidence in his untouchable status only grew over time. Senior colleagues, many of whom shared his dismissive attitude toward accountability, often swept allegations under the rug. Any reprimands he received were superficial, a slap on the wrist that left him emboldened. Bradshaw's disdain wasn't limited to civilians. He was openly hostile toward female officers, especially those who climbed the ranks. In his eyes, women didn't belong in positions of authority, and he didn't shy away from expressing those views in hushed conversations around the precinct. The news of a new police chief, a black woman no less, had sent Bradshaw into a quiet fury. He saw her appointment as an affront to everything he believed about the chain of command. Angela, on the other hand, was fully aware of the dynamics she was stepping into. She had read the reports, reviewed the complaints, and even quietly spoken to a few officers before officially taking her position. She understood that Bradshaw represented a broader culture within the precinct, one that thrived on complacency and resistance to accountability. For Angela, confronting individuals like Bradshaw wasn't just an inevitability. It was a necessary step in dismantling the systemic problems she had been brought in to address. Despite her high-profile reputation, Angela believed in leading by example and letting her actions speak louder than her titles. When she decided to make an unannounced visit to the precinct before formally introducing herself, it wasn't to intimidate or exert power. It was to observe. She wanted to see how the officers operated without the filter of knowing she was their new chief. What she witnessed during her visit would not only confirm the challenges ahead but also set the stage for one of the most pivotal moments in her career. Bradshaw's interaction with Angela wasn't just an example of individual misconduct. It was a snapshot of the broader culture she was determined to change. His arrogance, fueled by years of unchecked behavior, led him to make a critical error, assuming Angela's quiet presence meant she lacked authority. What he didn't realize was that the very woman he was mocking had the power to transform the department and his career forever. Bradshaw, feeling emboldened by his reputation as the precinct's resident bully, sneered at the woman standing calmly before him. Her confidence and composed demeanor irritated him even more, and in a moment of unrestrained arrogance, he reached for a steaming cup of coffee sitting on the desk. With an exaggerated motion, he poured the scalding liquid over her head, laughing as the hot liquid splashed down her face and onto her leather jacket. The other officers froze. The room, which moments ago had been bustling with chatter and activity, fell silent as the coffee hit her skin. A few officers, visibly appalled, exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to intervene. Others, less shocked but equally wary, let out nervous chuckles, more out of discomfort than agreement. Bradshaw, mistaking the silence for approval, doubled down. "Maybe, next time, you'll think twice before walking in here like you own the place," he said smugly, his voice dripping with condescension. The woman, her face now dripping with coffee, did something that no one in the precinct expected. She smiled. It wasn't a smile of amusement or submission, but one of quiet authority and unshakable confidence. Slowly, she reached for a napkin on the desk and wiped her face with deliberate precision. The tension in the room was palpable as every eye remained fixed on her, waiting for her next move. She adjusted her jacket, now stained with coffee, and fixed Bradshaw with an unwavering gaze. "Do you always treat your superior officers this way?" she asked, her voice calm and measured, as if she were discussing the weather. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Officers who had been standing idly suddenly straightened, their expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm. Bradshaw, however, looked unfazed. He blinked, then let out a bark of laughter, assuming this was some kind of joke. "Superior officer?" he scoffed, crossing his arms. "Listen, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but this is my precinct. People like you don't—" "Enough," she interrupted, her voice firm but not raised. Her calm demeanor cut through his arrogance like a knife. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an ID badge, holding it up for everyone to see. The shield gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Angela Daniels, Chief of Police. As of this morning, the room erupted into chaos. Gasps echoed across the precinct as officers scrambled to process what had just happened. A few whispered to one another in disbelief, while others stood frozen, staring at her badge as if it were a grenade. Bradshaw's smug grin faltered, replaced by a look of confusion, then dread. "Chief?" he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "You can't be serious. You're black? A woman? Wearing a leather jacket instead of a suit?" She finished for him, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, I'm aware. But none of that changes the fact that I'm your superior, Officer Bradshaw. And as of right now, you're on very thin ice." Bradshaw's face turned red, his earlier bravado now replaced by a mixture of anger and fear. "I didn't know," he began, but she held up a hand to silence him. "Whether you knew or not is irrelevant," she said, her tone sharp. "What matters is that you felt entitled to humiliate and assault someone you assumed had no authority. That speaks volumes about your character and this precinct's culture." At that moment, the double doors to the precinct swung open, and a group of sharply dressed individuals entered. It was her executive team along with representatives from city leadership. They had arrived to officially introduce her as the new police chief, but were now greeted with the aftermath of Bradshaw's reckless actions. Angela turned to the team and gestured toward Bradshaw. "Officer Bradshaw here just provided an excellent example of why this department is in desperate need of reform," she said, her voice carrying authority and composure. One of the officials stepped forward, clearly unimpressed with the scene. "Officer Bradshaw, you're relieved of duty pending an internal review," the official announced, much to the officer's visible dismay. The room remained tense as Angela looked around, addressing the stunned officers. "Let this be a lesson to everyone here," she said. "The days of unaccountable behavior and unchecked prejudice in this precinct are over. Effective immediately, we are raising the standard, not just for how you treat your colleagues, but for how you serve this community." As her words echoed through the room, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Bradshaw, now escorted out of the precinct, could barely meet anyone's gaze. The officers left behind looked at Angela with a mixture of respect, awe, and trepidation. Her composure had not only dismantled Bradshaw's arrogance, but had also sent a clear message. Change had arrived, and it was long overdue. Angela Daniels calmly reached into her pocket, pulling out her gleaming badge, and held it up for all to see. The room seemed to freeze in time as she spoke, her voice steady and authoritative. "Angela Daniels, your new police chief. I was appointed to lead this precinct as of this morning. My mission? To clean up this department and ensure accountability at every level." The smirk on Officer Bradshaw's face disappeared in an instant, replaced by a look of pure panic. His arrogance drained away as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. His earlier confidence that he could humiliate this woman without consequence now seemed absurd. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Some officers stepped back, distancing themselves from Bradshaw, their discomfort and unease palpable. Others stood frozen, their expressions a mix of shock and realization. The gravity of the situation became clear to everyone present. This wasn't just a routine morning. It was the beginning of a seismic shift in the precinct's culture. Angela turned her gaze toward Bradshaw, her eyes piercing. "Officer Bradshaw," she said sharply, "your behavior this morning is not only unprofessional, but also a clear violation of the standards this department claims to uphold. Consider yourself relieved of duty pending an internal review." Bradshaw stammered, his bravado shattered. "Chief, You didn't think," she interrupted, her tone cutting through his excuses. "That much is obvious. But this isn't just about you, Officer Bradshaw. Your actions are symptomatic of a deeper problem within this precinct, a culture that allows misconduct and disrespect to thrive unchecked. That ends now." Angela glanced at one of the senior officers standing nearby, who looked visibly uncomfortable. "Escort Officer Bradshaw to the captain's office immediately for a disciplinary hearing," she ordered. The senior officer nodded hesitantly and stepped forward to comply. As Bradshaw was led away, Angela turned her attention to the remaining officers. She straightened her jacket, her commanding presence filling the room. "Listen carefully," she began, her voice firm but measured. "What happened here today is not just about one individual's behavior. It's about the environment that allowed it to happen. From this moment forward, things will be different. Professionalism, accountability, and respect are no longer optional. They are mandatory." Her words carried weight, and the officers stood in stunned silence. Many began to realize that their days of turning a blind eye to misconduct were over. Angela's presence and authority were undeniable, and her message was clear. The precinct was no longer a safe haven for arrogance and abuse of power. In the moments that followed, whispers filled the room as officers exchanged glances, trying to process what had just unfolded. Angela, unfazed, turned and walked toward the captain's office. The message had been delivered, and the first steps toward transforming the precinct were already underway. Bradshaw's career was in jeopardy, and the rest of the department now faced the reality of a leader who would tolerate nothing less than excellence and integrity. Angela Daniels wasted no time in addressing the fallout from Officer Bradshaw's actions. Within hours of the incident, she had initiated a formal investigation, ensuring the process was transparent and swift. Bradshaw's behavior, captured on surveillance cameras and witnessed by numerous officers, left no room for ambiguity. By the end of the week, he was officially terminated for gross misconduct. The news of his dismissal sent a clear and powerful message throughout the precinct. Unprofessional and discriminatory behavior would no longer be tolerated. Angela made it her mission to ensure that this incident would not be a singular punishment, but a catalyst for systemic change. The chief immediately launched a comprehensive overhaul of the department's policies and training. Mandatory workshops on racial sensitivity, de-escalation techniques, and professional conduct were implemented for all officers, regardless of rank. Angela brought in respected community leaders and experienced trainers to lead these sessions, emphasizing the importance of mutual respect between law enforcement and the communities they served. Angela's approach wasn't just about rules and training. She actively engaged with her team. She held open forums, encouraging officers to voice their concerns and share their perspectives on how to improve the precinct's culture. Her willingness to listen, combined with her decisive actions, began to shift the atmosphere in the station. Officers who had initially been skeptical of her leadership started to see her as a strong and capable chief who wasn't there to micromanage but to elevate the department to a higher standard. Meanwhile, Angela set up a mentorship program for younger officers, pairing them with seasoned professionals who embodied the principles of respect and integrity. She also created an anonymous reporting system, ensuring that anyone could safely bring attention to misconduct without fear of retaliation. Slowly but surely, trust began to build within the precinct. Officers who had once laughed nervously during Bradshaw's outburst now felt a sense of relief that such behavior was being rooted out. They started to view Angela not as an outsider, but as a leader who demanded the best from everyone while giving her all in return. Her ability to command authority while remaining approachable and fair earned her genuine respect among the team. Angela didn't stop at internal reform. She reached out to the local community, organizing events to strengthen ties between residents and the police. These events not only showcased the precinct's commitment to change, but also allowed officers and civilians to connect on a personal level, breaking down barriers of mistrust. In a matter of weeks, the precinct began to feel like a different place. Officers worked with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that their actions were being held to a higher standard. Angela's leadership had proven that accountability was not just about consequences, but also about creating an environment where everyone could thrive with integrity. By addressing the root causes of misconduct and fostering a culture of respect and professionalism, Angela turned a moment of humiliation into a turning point for the entire department. Her unwavering dedication to reform earned her the admiration of her team, her community, and even the broader law enforcement community. Through her actions, Angela showed that true leadership is about creating lasting change, even in the face of adversity. Angela Daniels had transformed a moment of humiliation into a powerful lesson in leadership. Walking through the precinct months after the coffee-throwing incident, she was no longer met with skepticism or guarded glances. Instead, officers greeted her warmly, their nods and smiles reflecting a newfound respect for the police chief, who had not only demanded accountability, but also inspired change. The culture within the precinct had shifted significantly. Officers, once hesitant to challenge unprofessional behavior, now upheld a higher standard of conduct. Angela's reforms had created an environment where respect, fairness, and integrity weren't just buzzwords, but core principles woven into the department's fabric. Officers felt empowered to do their best, knowing that their leader held everyone, including herself, to the same standard. Meanwhile, the disgraced officer who had sparked the change was a distant memory to most, but his story served as a cautionary tale. Bradshaw was seen packing his belongings, the weight of his dismissal evident in his slouched posture. His arrogance had cost him not only his career but also his reputation. As he left the precinct for the last time, Angela's message was clear. Actions had consequences, and no one was above accountability. Angela's impact extended far beyond the walls of the precinct. At a large community event held to commemorate the precinct's transformation, she stood at the podium, her presence commanding but approachable. Officers and civilians alike gathered to hear her speak, united by a shared hope for a better future. Her speech was both reflective and forward-looking. This department has faced challenges, and change is never easy, she began, her voice steady. But true leadership starts with respect for the badge we wear and the people we serve. It's not about power or control. It's about building trust and ensuring justice for everyone, no matter their background. The crowd erupted in applause, moved by her words and the changes they had already seen under her leadership. Angela spoke of the importance of community police relations and outlined her vision for continued reform, emphasizing collaboration between law enforcement and the people they served. Her ability to connect with both groups was a testament to her authenticity and dedication. As the event concluded, Angela stepped off the stage, greeted by officers and community members who wanted to thank her personally. A young recruit approached her hesitantly, expressing how her leadership had inspired him to join the force with a renewed sense of purpose. Angela smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Always remember why you wear that badge," she said. "It's to protect and uplift, not to intimidate." In the final scene, Angela stood alongside her team, her gaze steady and filled with quiet determination. The precinct she now led was far from perfect, but it was on a path of continuous improvement. Angela knew there was still work to be done, but she also understood the power of persistence and resilience. Her leadership had shown that even the most entrenched systems could change when driven by courage and a commitment to justice. Her closing words at the event echoed in the minds of everyone present. Respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything we stand for. And with that, Angela Daniels became a symbol of hope, proving that true leadership could overcome even the deepest divisions.